Democratic politicians and the far left are declaring victory in Portland after it was announced federal law enforcement officers sent to the city to protect the courthouse would be withdrawn unconditionally. And if it sounds too good to be true for the left, that's because it is. In reality, what's actually happening is that the Democrats have agreed to surrender. Now, early on, local law enforcement, the Portland police, were actually working side by side with the feds as violent riots persisted and damage was being done to the federal courthouse. Fires were being set. Cops and federal cops were being attacked. Eventually, I guess because the Democrats thought they looked bad, the Portland police stood down, even issuing a statement saying we had nothing to do with the violence last night, leaving the federal officers on their own. The federal government surged the amount of federal law enforcement officers to protect the courthouse after 39 days of rioting. You see, according to Secretary Chad Wolf, they just want Portland police to do their jobs. If the Portland police were actually going around and arresting these rioters and stopping the riots, defending the buildings, including the federal courthouse, they wouldn't need to be there. And thus, we have an agreement. The Democrats have agreed to reinstate, in a matter of speaking, the Portland police to do their jobs, protecting these buildings. And if they do, under those conditions, the feds will agree to pull out their excess officers. That's right. Federal law enforcement agents will remain in the courthouse. The extra officers will leave only when the DHS feels comfortable that Portland police are doing their job. So why is it then that we have stories like this? Wheeler, the mayor of Portland, excited for the work ahead as feds withdraw from Portland? I think they're desperate to push the narrative that they've won to quell the riots. Interestingly, just the other day, the mayor of Portland said that he wanted to negotiate a ceasefire with federal law enforcement, but under what authority could he even do this? You see, he has no control over the far left extremists that are showing up, throwing explosives at the building. But he does have control over the Portland police. In my opinion, they pulled the police back early on because they wanted Trump to look bad. All of a sudden, the narrative emerged that federal law enforcement officers were secret police, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it made Trump look bad a little bit. Only then it backfired. You see, people started to realize that Trump was the only one willing to enforce the law. It started to make people oppose Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden the narrative flipped. They started blaming Trump, saying he wants the violence. Sorry, it was Portland that pulled their police back. So there it is. This is a surrender from the Democrats, but still being framed as though they've won. At the same time, Bill Barr testified just the other day that if the violence from Antifa is not stopped, it will metastasize. It will get worse and it must be crushed. Sorry to say, this is not a defeat for federal law enforcement. This is them finally admitting defunding the police, withdrawing police, abolishing police does not work, and you need your police to do their jobs. If the police do their jobs, then fine. The feds will withdraw. So sure, both sides are going to try and declare victory on this one, but in the end, it really does seem like it's the Democrats who've given up. Now let's read the story and go through everything that's going on. I'll break down for you exactly how this is happening, because of course, both sides want to say they won. Before we do, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are many ways you can give, but the best thing you can do, actually, subscribe. About half the people who watch my videos aren't even subscribed. If that's you and you want to make sure you get access to every video I put out every day at 4 p.m., hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you really want to, share the video to help spread the word. Here's the story from KOIN6. Wheeler excited to work for the work ahead as feds withdraw from Portland. They say, the morning after Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler confirmed his office was in talks with federal officials about the tense situation in downtown Portland, Oregon, Governor Kate Brown announced certain federal officers will be withdrawn. Governor Brown said federal officers will be withdrawn from Portland by Thursday at the latest. She tweeted the news early Wednesday morning saying, quote, after my discussions with VP Pence and others, the federal government has agreed to withdraw federal officers from Portland. They have acted as an occupying force and brought violence. Starting tomorrow, all Customs and Border Protection and ICE officers will leave downtown Portland. Leave downtown Portland? I wonder what that means, because according to the actual agreement, they're not going to leave until they're satisfied. This story from Coin6 is actually fairly biased. In reality, the New York Times has the story. Federal agents agree to withdraw from Portland with conditions. Governor Kate Brown of Oregon said the teams will begin a withdrawal on Thursday. Federal officials cautioned that they will withdraw only when they are confident the federal courthouse can be secured. So maybe it is true that they will actually leave downtown Portland, but it doesn't mean they're actually going to leave completely. I think the feds are going to pull back a little bit. We're going to see Portland police come in, and if the Portland police do their job, then the extra forces that were brought in by DHS no longer need to be there. Sounds like the feds will have finally won, forcing the Democrats to bring the police back. That's been the whole fight, right? One of the demands from the far leftists has been defunding the police. Looks like they lost that one. I'll tell you what, the New York Times says, federal tactical teams that have clashed with protesters in Portland in recent weeks will soon begin leaving the city, Governor Kate Brown said on Wednesday. Under an agreement between Mrs. Brown and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the governor's office said the Oregon State Police will provide security for the exterior of the city's federal courthouse, while the usual team of federal officers that protects the courthouse year-round will continue to provide security for the interior. And there it is. The federal officers that work in the building will stay. Hold on a minute. Wasn't it another demand of the far left that the feds would leave? Oh, they're not. So let's talk about their demands so far. Did they defund the police? No. In fact, they're sending the police back out. Are the feds leaving? You could argue technically yes, but no. The federal officers that are normally there will remain. Are they going to, is Mayor Ted Wheeler going to resign? No. And are the protesters being released from jail unconditionally? No. The far left has lost completely. The Democrats have realized they're looking worse and worse every day, especially with Bill Barr's hearing last night, when the Republicans showed all of the violence sweeping this country, including 2 months of violence in Portland. It was making Trump look good, and they realized it. So they decided, send in the police. We've got to stop this. The Democrats were becoming this weird. Look, a lot of people were starting to point out that they were abandoning the Democratic Party. I'm not saying all or most, but many, because of this weird experiment in non-policing, forcing Trump to be the only one willing to enforce the law. And then guess what people started thinking? Maybe in the suburbs, where they're like, not in my backyard, right? Well, if Trump's going to be the only one who will do it and the Democrats keep standing down, then why vote for the Democrats? They realized they had to get tough. Take a look at this statement from Kate Brown. She says, after my discussion with VP Pence and others, they're going to be withdrawing and occupying force. You get it, right? Our local Oregon State police officers will be downtown to protect Oregonians' right to free speech and keep the peace. Let's center the Black Lives Matter movement's demands on racial justice and police accountability. It's time for bold action to reform police practices. I got to tell you, it's not even about the Portland police. They're sending in state police. This is beyond surrender. They're adding state forces. The Democratic governor said, fine, we will send in more police, please. Just make it stop. I tell you what, man, DHS has won on this one. Acting Secretary Chad Wolf says, the state of Oregon is finally agreeing to cooperate with our federal forces, exactly what we asked for since the nightly violence broke out 2 months ago. We're glad Oregon is now correcting their months-long error. And he's right. They are. Play any game you want. They are. He says, we will maintain our current augmented federal law enforcement personnel in Portland until we are assured that the Hatfield Federal Courthouse and other federal properties will no longer be attacked and that the seat of justice in Portland will remain secure. DHS Gov will not back down from our legal duty to protect federal law enforcement officers and federal properties in the face of violent criminal behavior. POTUS made clear that this administration is ready and willing to partner with state and local law enforcement to protect every American, and you see that commitment in Portland with this plan. In fact, they issued this huge list of facts and myths saying that, the myth, Trump administration deployed federal troops to the streets of Portland. Fact, DHS personnel sent to protect federal facilities in Portland are sworn civilian federal law enforcement officers, not military, and they're protecting federal buildings. They had to issue all of this because it's been one big game of propaganda. But as we move on to the next and the most important subject, let me just make it very, very clear so we can say definitively the Democrats have surrendered. They have surrendered. And dare I say, you could argue it's unconditional. Maybe not fair to say because they want the feds to leave. But they have agreed that they will send in Oregon State Police to secure the building. And then once they've proven it, the feds will leave. Sounds like the feds are getting everything they've asked for in exchange for nothing. Well, Bill Barr said it best the other day. AG Barr thinks Antifa will spread if states don't squash the violence. He's right. He's absolutely right. And that's why the feds were defending the courthouse. You cannot allow these extremists to do whatever they want. And look, the press made Trump look good. Well, let's see exactly what Bill Barr had to say. Attorney General William Barr is concerned that Antifa-led violence will grow and spread across the country if state officials allow riots to continue rocking their cities. During a hearing in front of the House Judiciary Committee on Tuesday, Barr pushed back on New York Rep. Jerry Nadler's claim that violence in Portland by the extremist group is a myth. I don't think it's a myth, Barr said, adding the violent far-left radical group was heavily represented in recent riots. This is the important part. Why is it that the DHS has demanded that Oregon send in more police? Bill Barr made it clear yesterday. If the state officials allow the riots, Antifa will spread. So when the state officials in Oregon agreed to the demands of DHS to actually enforce the law, now they said, good, now we're happy. Because like Bill Barr said, if they allow it, Antifa will get worse. Now this is a typo. This is a mistake by the New York Post. There's a quote here. It's a national organization that moves nationally. They tend to get organized for an event, and there's a lot of organization right before an event occurs. But we see a lot of the organization during the mob violence. This is actually a false quote by the New York Post. I am going to issue a fact check here. What he actually said was, I'm not suggesting it's a national organization that moves nationally. Matt Gaetz then floated using RICO laws, famously used to prosecute mafia figures to prosecute an organization like this, and Barr agreed that Antifa attacking federal property was a problem that could metastasize if the government doesn't shut it down. So Barr was actually saying it's not a national organization. It's a bunch of different organizations, but they will grow. They will be emboldened unless something is done. We are concerned about this problem metastasizing around the country. Barr defended his decision to deploy more than 100 federal troops to downtown Portland, where Oregon officials have allowed hundreds of demonstrations to riot for 2 months and repeatedly attempt to burn down a federal courthouse. During the highly charged hearing, Democrat lawmakers insisted the protests were peaceful and a wall of moms, as Barr reminded them that demonstrators came armed with rifles and explosive devices and had injured multiple officers. Yes, and the other day I said it. Bill Barr obliterated the lies. He said, since when is it okay to try and burn down a federal courthouse? Yesterday at the hearing, the Democrats desperately tried to make it seem like they were peaceful protests and Bill Barr was deploying stormtroopers around the country, and it's all fake news. And now even the Democrats in Oregon have agreed to the conditions of the federal government. They say, when asked if federal troops should abandon the city and withdraw, Barr said he had no doubt the violence would spread. We feel that we have to in a place like Portland, where when we don't have the support of the state, the local government, we have to take a stand and defend this federal property. We can't get to a level where we're going to accept these kinds of violent attacks on a federal court. In Portland, we have a relatively small number of federal officers who have been withstanding this for almost 2 months. It's a great strain, but we cannot just stand aside and allow the federal court to be destroyed. President Trump has tried to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. Well, Bill Barr said he doesn't think it's an organization in that capacity, but they will be investigated under these sort of terms. So I want to show you, well, here's a tweet from Michael Tracy before we move on to the next point, because he makes a great point. He says, however exactly you want to define Antifa, it's not true that they are powerless saps. Ideological insurrectionists helped spark the most widespread riots in at least 50 years. Local governments are passing laws to accommodate their demands. Democratic officials bizarrely defend them. And he's right. This is what I want to get to next. Democrats seek to shame Barr over politics at the Justice Department. Now, what I find truly fascinating in this hearing is that they didn't actually hear anything. They spoke over Bill Barr, didn't give him a chance to speak, and actually engaged in complete and utter nonsense. I want to read this for you from the Washington Post, but I got to show you this. This post right here kind of proves everything. The Washington Examiner has a snippet. He was disrespectful, spoke over top of every one of us. In particular, he spoke over women. He was flanked by at least 10 staffers, not a person of color among them. Rep. Dean, so this is Congresswoman Madeline Dean, and I believe she's part of the, she's in the House Judiciary Committee, accuses Barr of being disrespectful and living in a bubble. Listen to what she had to say.
His willingness to say one thing and in a single statement flip his own answer. He did that with me. When I said, do you believe it's ever appropriate to use pepper balls against protesters? He said, no. And then he wanted to flip back and he said, well, wait a second. Well, rioters, yes. He could not keep a straight answer.
He could not keep a straight answer. When asked if it was okay to use pepper balls against protesters, he said no. And Bill Barr is 100% correct. Peaceful protesters who are marching around, you don't fire pepper balls at. Rioters, however, you do. But you heard it from Madeline Dean. He couldn't keep a straight answer. I asked him, and he said, no, you can't against protesters, but yes, against rioters. What? Does she think that they're the same thing? Because they're not. And that was the problem with everything that happened at this hearing. We need to get to the root of what's going on. We need law enforcement to do their job. Instead, what do we get? The Democrats bizarrely defend the far left extremists. Mayor Ted Wheeler goes out and joins them. And then they declare victory when they finally say, fine, we'll actually enforce the law. They've been losing the whole time. And they've had some victories, but I'll tell you what's really, really weird about everything they've done over the past several years is that they keep losing. Impeachment was a failure. The Covington thing was a disaster for the left, for the media, for the Democrats. Ukraine gate fizzled out, ultimately with impeachment. Russiagate was a failure. How many times do they have to be wrong? And how many times do they have to lose before they realize this stuff doesn't work? You can't play these stupid games. Their pathetic attempt at manipulation isn't working. And by shouting down Bill Barr, they just look, well, rather unhinged. But of course, I'll tell you what. Democrats seek to shame Barr over politics. Yeah. You know what I think they were really trying to do? I don't think it had anything to do with Bill Barr. It had everything to do with them trying to get reelected. Well, Bill Barr was supposed to be talking about far left extremism and the Portland riots. They were screaming about Roger Stone and Donald Trump, and they wouldn't even let him speak. There's now supercut videos popping up of the Democrats saying things like, I'll reclaim my time, I'll reclaim my time. No, they've lost this one. Absolutely lost it. When the Republicans were questioning Bill Barr, they let him say what he needed to say. The Democrats didn't. You know why? The Democrats knew that if Bill Barr spoke up, it would prove them wrong. In one of the questions that's gone viral, he was asked about protesters in front of the White House that were cleared out by federal law enforcement and military police. He was asked, or he was told, I believe it was a question, that some high-ranking religious officials had condemned the action in clearing out these protests. And Bill Barr said, was that before or after we put out the fire? And that was a mic drop moment. Yeah. For political reasons, people want to scream Orange Man bad and Bill Barr bad. But they have picked a fight they cannot win right now, especially against Bill Barr. Bill Barr served as the Attorney General, and I believe it was 91 to 93 under George H.W. Bush. And according to several articles, I've looked back. I'm thinking, look, they're all screaming Bill Barr is the devil. He is a crony mobster to Donald Trump. I said, okay, if this guy has served as the AG before, and he's telling us right now these are violent rioters trying to burn down a church, we need to stop the violence before it spreads, and they're defending the rioters and condemning Barr, something doesn't make sense because they didn't condemn him last time. Sure enough, back in the day, both Democrats and Republicans alike actually liked Bill Barr. It was a genius move of Donald Trump, and I mean it, to bring Bill Barr on to deal with, to be the Attorney General. Because now it may be that he's biased against the left, but it seems like Bill Barr is biased against the left much in the same way I am. I do not understand how you have someone trying to burn down a federal courthouse and the media and the Democrats actively lie for and defend these people. One of the Democrats said, there was a group of armed men carrying Confederate flags, demanding the governor be beheaded, protesting, and you didn't know about that one. That says to me, blah, blah, blah. It says nothing. Peaceful protesters who are armed and probably saying some abhorrent things, sure, standing around and doing nothing does not require a federal response. More importantly, it was on state property, not federal property. Here's the reality. And the left is not telling, look, man, I feel bad. There are a lot of people that don't want to accept the truth. And the truth is, Portland police stood down. There were no state police, and it was up to the DHS to defend this courthouse. So they sent in more officers, CBP and ICE, to assist U.S. Marshals who were being beaten back. Why? To prevent catastrophe. Because if these swarms attacked a marshal and he was in fear for his life and he used live ammo because he would rather not die, that would be worse. Bringing in more officers, detaining people for questioning, and putting up barriers helped stop the extreme violence. And the reality is now, the Democrats in Oregon have finally dropped to their knees for the DHS and said, we will do whatever you say. Just please stop making Trump look good. Yeah, because it was Trump who was saying, we are going to enforce the law. And now Oregon State will be sending in state police, bolstering the police under their authority and their jurisdiction. And that flies in the face of the narrative of defund the police. It flies in the face of their narrative of Trump's secret police, because now they got their own. They lost. They lost everything. The far left got none of their demands. You can argue the feds are leaving, but I'm pretty sure they wanted all of the feds out, not some of the feds out. And for now, the feds will only leave once they feel comfortable. The demands from the far leftists, of course, are absurd. And I can't tell you why it is the Democrats think it's a winning platform to adopt. But unfortunately, perhaps the real issue is people, they don't know anything about what's going on, and they just believe whatever they're told. Now, you've heard all the stories about unmarked and unidentified police snatching people up. And of course, it's fake news. Look, unmarked vehicles and plainclothes cops have existed for a very, very long time. It's not a new thing. But the media hypes it up to make the Democrats look good, just like this story here. Jailed Portland protesters must agree to stop going to protests to be freed. This is an extreme exaggeration that we see. It's propagandistic warfare. Newsweek puts this out either because the author is too inept to actually Google search how this works or what's really going on, or they want to take something that's actually normal and make it seem shocking and extreme. Now, you may be saying, Tim, but wait a minute. How could they be told they can't protest? It's a violation of their First Amendment rights. People who get arrested for committing a crime have bail conditions. And yes, sometimes you have certain rights restricted. This is not necessarily a violation of their First Amendment rights. If they have been arrested for engaging in a violent riot, and a condition of their bail is, we're going to release you until your court date, but we don't want you to go to any more of these events because you were literally arrested for rioting there. That's actually a normal thing. Okay, you can argue it shouldn't be allowed. You can argue it shouldn't be normal. That's okay. That's fine. Maybe I'll agree, right? That's not the point. The point is, this has been done over and over and over again, and it's part of bail conditions. During Occupy Wall Street, they arrested tons of people on the Brooklyn Bridge. I think it was like 800 people tried crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. They all got arrested. As part of their plea conditions, they said, okay, I'll tell you what, we plead guilty and you will get no charge. Basically, you'll get court supervision. And that's it. However, you can't join the protests again. That's your condition. And most of the people said yes. Now, a lot of people back then were also upset by this too. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that this happens. You can't expect them to be like, look, imagine if you got caught robbing a bank and it was like, super duper national bank. And then you get arrested. They say, we'll release you on, on bond under the condition that you do not return to that bank. Is that a violation of their freedom of movement or their right to bank? No, you were arrested for allegedly trying to rob the bank. So if they tell you not to show up to the scene of the crime again because you're facing trial, probably a good idea not to do it. But of course, the narrative emerging is that it's a violation of their rights and perhaps maybe fine. The point is, it happens. It happens all the time. And you can't expect them to be like, we've arrested you, we're going to release you. Go ahead and go right back. In Portland, they do actually, though. The Portland grand juries, the citizens don't want to indict these people. They get released. This is an ongoing problem, and it proves that Bill Barr is right. Antifa violence will spread unless the state starts doing something. That includes prosecuting, and that includes sending out the police like they've now agreed to do. So dare I say, Bill Barr and the DHS have totally won this, an unconditional surrender by the left. The DHS will only leave after they send their police in. If the police agreed to leave and then the state would send in police, I'd call that, a kind of ceasefire. But considering the feds have announced they will remain until they secure it, that's them saying, here are conditions to leave. Give us what we want. So, okay, not an unconditional surrender, but a surrender nonetheless. We'll see how this plays out tonight. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all there.